Welcome back to this session of building materials in construction. I hope so. In the last two previous classes, you have got to know the concepts regarding the basic aspects of the building materials and construction. And in the previous class, we have dealt with respect to the usage of the stones, how the stones are obtained. It is through the process of the quarrying, especially the stones are to be carved from the wet surface of the rock. So therefore, we have come across for the three systems of the classification of the rocks, especially geological classification. Next, we have across the chemical deposits, or maybe related to the any of the chemical reactions. We have the chemical type of the classification, maybe siliceous, argillaceous or calcareous in nature. And physical sorts of a classification, we also come across for the concepts of stratified, unstratified and foliated type of the rocks. And for each of the rocks, we have given the examples. Next aspect is you also study regarding what are the usages of the stones, not only for the building of the houses, but also it has a wide range of utilities in the small scale to the large scale construction purpose usages. Okay. Next part we have come across is what are the stones to be utilized. That means if the stones are to be utilized for the construction purpose, what are the requirements? The requirements of the stones, I think we have dealt with respect to the 4 requirements. Once again, let us repeat in this part of the class and continue with the further concepts. Okay, let us come one by one. Requirements of the good building stones. First requirement, it is related to the appearance. Appearance. How does the appearance has to be? It has to be the pleasing in appearance, okay, and it has to be aesthetic in concern, and it should be free from any of the tainted part, or maybe the tarnished part of the stone shall not be tend to persist in nature. That is the one thing. Next thing it should also be free from the potholes, or what we call it as a clay holes, or any other spots that will tie, or what we call it as to render the stones in an aesthetic concern. Next thing, after the appearance, as I have ensured that it should be free from clay holes as well as the spots also. Next thing we come across is related to the compressive strength. Compressive strength. The compressive strength shall always be greater than 100 Newton per millimeter square. It should have a tough part of the compressive strength, because brittleness or maybe the hardness is one of the measuring aspect in the structural aid or the concern. So therefore, whatever the load that has been applied over the area is to be greater than 100 Newton per millimeter square. We call it as a good compressive strength type of the rocks. If it has been less than that, so therefore only it is used for the roof, not for the roof covering materials, like any for the compound purpose or maybe the walls. Okay, that kind of the usage can be done by classifying on the compressive strength basis also. Next, third one. Here another important aspects you need to learn, especially the durability. Whatever the rocks that or the stones that you're going to use, it should be quite more durable. But the durability also depends upon the various type of the factors. We call it as an intrinsic as well as an extrinsic factors. The factors which are being in a collective manner, especially we go for using it over a longer period of the time. If you are going to use it for the longer period of the time, therefore The durability mainly depends upon the weathering conditions, okay, even the temperature as well as the rain and the changes in the chemical constituents. These are the factors which affects the durability. Weathering phenomena, okay, maybe if it has been splitted up due to any other external agencies, or maybe the weather conditions that we come across. It may be alternative dryness or the wetness conditions letting into the crack portion. Temperature, daytime temperature increases, nighttime temperature decreases. So therefore what happens? Tendency to go for expansion and contraction takes place. This is one thing. Rain. If any of the porous content is present in the stone, so therefore the stone is not used for a longer run purpose because it is not durable in nature. Next, chemical constituents. Chemical constituents, it depends upon the mineral or maybe the chemical compound contents which are present in the rock or the stones. If the stones are laid next to each other, so therefore the chemical interaction takes place, thereby it leads to the deterioration of the stones. That is the one part of the requirements that you need to take care in wise thinking. Next, moving on to the next part of the good requirements, it is the hardness content. Obviously, hardness is determined through the abrasion. We call it as abrasion testing machine, where the stone are subjected to the wear and tear. When they are being subjected to the wear and tear, therefore, the surface of the hardness is a greater concern. How it is? If the abrasion is determined through the coefficient, we call it as a coefficient of the hardness through the testing machine, where the stone is being kept there, a disc is being made to revolve, and it is being rubbed over the surface. So what is the percentage of the wear or tear can also be taken up. Meanwhile, the hardness is determined by the coefficient, what I told, the value, how much it has to be. The value has to be, the coefficient has to be greater than 17. We call it as high hardness content. High hardness content. If it has been in the range of 14 to 17, we call it as a moderate hardness. If it has been less than 14, therefore we call it as a low hardness. And this low hardness exhibiting feature of the stones shall not be used for the construction or especially for the foundations. Okay, they are only used for making a coverage, or maybe call it as a topping type of the materials. There it can be used, where it can be used as a chips type of the materials. Next, another condition or the criteria we come across, what is the percentage of the wear. Okay, the percentage of wear is mainly calculated based on the test, we call it as attrition test. Attrition test. What does this attrition test? How much is the wear and tear, as I have told. And meanwhile, the percentage of the wear shall be always minimum to an extent. Okay? And it shall not be tend to cross more than 3%. So percentage of the wear shall not be greater than 3%. Maximum 2 to 3%. That's all. not more than that. If the percentage goes on increasing, then the surface or the texture or the strength is less in nature, therefore it will be exhibit low hardness, therefore wear and tear becomes very much easier. For that particular concepts, we need to check even the percentage of the wear. Next, another important thing, it is resistance to fire. The sixth one, it is resistance to fire. Obviously, all the stones cannot be having the same qualities. They have a different properties as well as the physical as well as the chemical features. Therefore, resistance towards the fire, obviously the clay type of the stones, okay, which have been obtained, they exhibit high resistance, and even the sandstone also. Lime can also exhibit, but in the blast furnace where iron is being manufactured, the clay linings are being provided, the refractory linings. The reason is it has an ability or a capability to withstand against the fire, but the strength will be less. If you take the granite or any other things, or maybe the marble, or maybe even the shale, or maybe the slate, what happens? Each and every sort of the stones, they exhibit the different characterization in the variations of the resistance. They have the granite, though it has a high resistance, but if you take a slate itself only, it has a least resistance so that it can be broken up into the pieces. And lime, if you are going to take, it will tend to react to form calcium hydroxide and calcium oxide also. That is the one thing, and that is a byproduct obtained. Therefore, care has to be taken for the resistance of the fire selection also. Next, seventh one. We also know the another important aspect is stones which are being taken for the construction, they have to be seasoned well. Okay, what is meant by seasoning? The term seasoning, it refers to exposure to the atmosphere for a period of 6 to 12 months. Okay? What is the period of the 6 to 12 months? Since the stones which are extracted freshly, they contain moisture content. Okay? They have the moisture content, and the water content or the moisture content is known as a quarry sap. Quarry sap. This is solely responsible for the softness of the stones. Softness of the stones. Stones cannot be softer, it should be hard in nature, so therefore they have to be subjected for the exposure to the atmosphere. Thereby, over a period of the 6 to 12 months, the quarry sap get adjusted, and therefore the moisture content to be lesser in nature, and therefore they will be well seasoned in nature. That is one criteria. So, if the seasoning is not being done directly, it is being taken for the construction purpose, therefore you are inviting the disastrous part, because the chemical constituents or the reactions what I have explained here, it will tend to decrease the durability of the stones. This is how the another interrelationship that we are going to check about for the good requirements. Okay? Next, eighth one. You know about the seasoning part. The next another that we come across is related to the specific gravity. What is meant by specific gravity? You have study related to the engineering mechanics. In the fluid mechanics, you have come across the concept related to the specific gravity. It is the ratio of the substance of a material or the density of the material to that of the density of the standard substance. It does not have any value or any dimensions. Okay? Especially the specific gravity should always be greater than 2.6 for the stones. So lesser specific gravity means that kind of the stones cannot be utilized for heavy part of the construction purpose, especially in the case of the roadways as well as even the railways also. Okay, and that is the major criteria that we go for selecting it, because they have to be compact in nature and less porous in nature. Therefore, the specific gravity should be equal to 2.7. That is good for a heavy stones. Okay. Now, there are other sorts of the criteria. We have come across the specific gravity also. Next thing it is, if the specific gravity is being lesser, obviously these heavy stones can be laid for the foundations and all. Less than 2.7 or any other things in the range of like 2.4 to like that, only in that particular cases it is being laid for the roof as well as the domes. Maybe in the temples and all you can come across. So at the bottom and all they use for the granite. The top they will not use a granite. Some other sorts of the materials are added for that. Okay. Example, if you take the Tanjavur Brihadeshwara temple, even Madurai Meenakshi temple, or if you take even a Qutub Minar, the sorts of the stones which are utilized, they are quite different. Okay. Next thing that we come across, specific gravity in relationship with respect to the texture of the material. Okay. Texture. What does the texture it represents? Means what are the patterns or how the appearances it has been looking on. So whether it possesses a coarse grained crystalline structure or fine grained crystalline structure is another criteria. Okay. Especially for this, the texture, it has to be a fine grained crystalline structure. Fine grained crystalline structure, free from the spots as we have mentioned earlier, maybe in the holes and cleavages or maybe the furrow types and all, that it has to be free from this. That is what we call it as a good texture. Okay. Next thing that we come across is related to the toughness content of the stone. 10th one, that is related to toughness. Hardness is one criteria. Toughness, obviously, how strong is the stone, if at all a sudden impact has been persisted or impact on the stones has taken place. For that particular part, we have the toughness test, especially we conduct it for the coarse aggregate. Okay. The toughness index is determined, it is a ratio itself only, it does not have any sorts of dimensions. Based upon the toughness content, we go for the classifying as a heavy or maybe moderate and even the low toughness content. Okay. So in this part, we have an impact test. If the toughness value is greater than 19, we call it as a high toughness content. If it is in the range of 13 to 19, we have a moderate toughness content. Or in the other sense, if we have less than 13, then we have a low toughness content. Okay. So low toughness content cannot be utilized for the roads and all. High toughness only can be utilized for the roads. Similarly, even for the usage of the foundations for the soil. Okay. So, till now you have come across for the appearance, compressive strength, durability, hardness, percentage of the wear, and then resistance towards the fire, seasoning, specific gravity, texture and toughness. What are the remaining parts? Obviously, mainly related to the weathering condition and presence of the materials which tends to deteriorate the stones is also one of the criteria. What is that part of the criteria? Let us get to know the one by one. Okay. One thing it is, the 12th one we come across, sorry, the 11th one, it is related to the water absorption test. Water absorption. What is meant by water absorption? That means whether the stone possesses any porous content in that. If the porous content has been more, so therefore the the stone tend to absorb more and more water content. That means it does not offer any resistance, the voidness content will be more in that. In such cases, so therefore water absorption will be more. And if the water absorption will be more, it aids to the dampness condition and it cracks. This thing has to be controlled. So, if it has to be controlled, check upon for the test, we call it as a water absorption test. What is the initial weight of the stone? Immerse in the water, take up the final weight and A minus B divided by the water is worth the content that you have taken in the initial part. Okay, that you divide into the 100, you get to know what is the water absorption content of the stones. Similarly, the water absorption of the stones shall not be greater than 0.6. It should be equal to maximum of 0.6 itself only, not more than that. That is one of the particular criteria. Next thing we have weathering phenomena. Weathering phenomena is another criteria. Let me explain for a while. Okay, we have a weathering phenomena. The weathering, as I have told, it affects the durability. The weathering is mainly responsible even for the disintegration of the stones also, or even for the rocks also. So, keeping that in the mind, alternative wetness is the one and drying. Again, the atmospheric agencies, especially the hydrogen sulfide, if it has been present, it tends to dissolve in the moisture oriented part of the stones and lead to the deterioration. Okay? Likewise, it has been absorbed. Chemical constituents in the form of the rain, which tends to react with the stone and leading to the decay. Okay, and even the living organisms are also quietly responsible. Let us take it to the next part of the stage, that is, if you need to take a good requirement of the stones, these are the ideal part. In an practical aspects, if you are going to check regarding that, only few are feasible in nature. Okay? What are those? Only part of the stones can be utilized for the construction purpose. Not all the stones cannot be utilized for the construction purpose, but it can be utilized for other sorts of an usages. We call it as a miscellaneous usages. So, this is related to the requirements of the good building stones. Next important thing that we need to take care is, if you go for choosing the stones having all this kind of the good requirements, but even though the stone tends to decay and we call it as disintegration or the deleterious effects on the stones. What is the reason behind that? What are the factors affecting it? Let us get to know one by one. Okay? Deterioration of stones. Deterioration of stones. In the deterioration of the stones, there are different sorts of the reasons. What are those? Maybe the weathering phenomena, or it may be the organic matter content, and even the chemical constituents. These are the three major aspects that cause the deterioration of the stones. What are those? Let us get to know one by one. First one is alternative wetness and drying. Alternative wetness and drying. As earlier I have stated, in the good requirements of the stones, this is also one of the parameters. The alternative wetness and drying, it mainly constitutes to the deterioration in a manner that during a daytime or maybe during the night time also, sometimes what happens, the moisture content which is being present in the atmosphere tend to deposit on the surface of the rock or maybe on the stones. Literally, even in the afternoon time, what happens, the drying takes place. Wetness will be making a pavement or maybe the pathway for the absorption of the moisture content. Okay, and the drying, what happens, due to the exposure of the sunlight condition, the stone gets dried off. This alternative wetness and drying causes the stone to crack, leave a cleavage or furrow itself only. That is what we call it as alternative wetness and drying, responsible for it. Another thing next we come across is the freezing and thawing of the pipes. Or what we call it as a frozen or maybe the freezing and thawing. Especially in the northern part of the India where Himalaya regions are present, okay, and the northern Arctic pole and even the southern pole, okay, Antarctic region, stones cannot be used wisely for the construction purpose. In that cases, what is the reason means, during the rainfall or any other things, the water tend to flow regarding to the stones. And when the temperature drops to near 0 or maybe less than that, minus degree Celsius, therefore the freezing takes place. Okay? So, in that process what happens, during the daytime the thawing process, that means the flow takes place, not complete freezing, but in the night time the freezing takes place. This leads to the deterioration of the stones. Next, moving on to the third one of the important culprit, we call it as a rainwater. How rainwater is a culprit in nature? Because indirectly it brings on the effects. How it is? Whatever the impurities which are present in where? Either in the atmosphere, it will tend to dissolve. This dissolved impurities will tend to make the rainwater slightly acidic in nature. This acidic nature will tend to crumble the rocks or maybe the stones. It makes much porous in nature. This phenomena you can observe in the case of the Taj Mahal also, okay? How it has been impacted due to the refinery oils which are presented far away from the Taj Mahal on the banks of the river Yamuna itself only. The atmospheric emissions from the factories has led to the deposition in the form of the rainwater, where the minerals are dissolved. This acidic water is being poured, or maybe which we call it as a showered along to the surface, where the rainwater is being getting carried away through the movement of the clouds, and this has rendered the deterioration aspects of the stones. Next, fourth one, rainwater is one thing, and again what I am told, the impurities. Impurities in atmosphere, as I have told, there are various impurities. It may be the acidic impurities or maybe an alkali impurities. Moreover, alkali is less in nature, but acidic impurities tends to have a greater impact. Impact will be greater. Even in the form of the hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen chloride, nitric acid, and then the carbonate content is also responsible. Okay. So these are the responsible compounds leading to the impurities. In addition to that, we have other sorts, the combination of heavy metals and all, or minerals extraction process. But for you people, this will be enough to know the impurities. Next, fifth one. Fifth one is related to the living organisms. I'll be going to continue in this side. Fifth one is related to the living organisms. What are those living organisms? The living organisms, they are either the bacteria, a unicellular organism, and even the multicellular organism also. Okay. This part we call it as in invertebrates or the insects. They are responsible for eating up of the stones and all. How it has been possible? Due to the weathering phenomena itself only, the living organisms, bacteria, release some of the compounds which tends to make the stones much more softer in nature, finally leading to the disintegration. This disintegration is carried out by the living organisms. That is the one thing. And what about the invertebrates? So especially some of the insects are also mainly responsible for it. So this is a one thing. Next, sixth one, it is related to the vegetation growth. What does the vegetation growth it covers to? The vegetation growth means small plants are grown across the stones or maybe on the surface of the rock itself only. What happens? The roots of the vegetation will tend to penetrate into the deeper aspects of the rock, making the rock much more softer in nature due to the entry of the water into the rock through the root channels. That root channels is the major part where it leads to the expansion. Due to the vegetation or the root expansion, what happens? The crack of the stone tends to develop. Example you can able to see in the abandoned type of the stone masonries, or maybe in the kind of the temples which have been shattered away itself. Okay. There you can see the vegetation growth. Next one if you are going to see is mainly related to the harmful constituents, okay, or the movement of the chemicals. That is the one thing. What is the movement of chemicals? Movement of chemicals, as I have stated, that there will be the exchange or the bonding between the one part of the rock which is utilized, maybe the granite or maybe the limestone is being placed one next to another. So therefore, the sulfide content will tend to have an exchange or an interaction with respect to the lime, or maybe the sandstone also. Okay. Likewise, the movement of the chemicals which tends to cause the deterioration, changes in composition. When the composition is being changed due to the chemical reaction which is irreversible in nature, therefore the disintegration takes place. That we call it as a chemical part of an disintegration. Okay. Next thing it is the nature of mortar. What kind of the nature of the mortar that you are going to use it? If the nature of the mortar is utilized having high alkali content or maybe any heavy metal content in nature or high lime content, so therefore care has to be taken, because it should not tend to cause any changes in a chemical manner. That is the one case. Next thing it is, ninth one, the wind action. The wind action is also solely responsible as a extrinsic part of an agency, where heavy winds blew tends to crack the stones, means the pressure will be applied for that, and therefore it will be tending to crack or leave a cleavages there. That kind can be seen through the wind action over a period of the time, not only in one day. It takes years together to form a crack or the development itself only, finally reaching to the deterioration. So therefore, finally we come across the deterioration of the stones, alternative wetness and drying, the freezing and thawing, rainwater, and impurities which are being present in the atmosphere, the physical impurities as well as which is being present directly towards the stones. Chemical means inter-reaction. Finally, living organisms, vegetation growth of the plants, and then the movement of the chemicals, nature of the mortar that you are going to use it, lime or maybe any sorts of the mortar, cement or surki mortar, whatever that you are going to utilize is an artificial means. The wind action is also one of the agency responsible for the deterioration of the stones. Now, there is a time to conserve the stones also when it has been extracted and utilized for the construction purpose. What is that? We shall get to know regarding the dressing phenomena of the stones in the next part of the class. Okay? Till then, stay tuned for it, and thank you one and all. We shall meet in the next part of the session.